Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you all for coming out here on this pretty cold afternoon, so it's great to be here with you. Before I begin, I just want to make an announcement. In the month of March, which is fast approaching, this lunch and learn will take place in Handelman Hall, which is on this floor. It's the main room on this floor. You kind of just go straight when you come in. So during March, that's where this class will be held, and you'll be with Rabbi Burnham. So I'm sure that'll be amazing. Let's begin with a story. There were three people. One was Jewish, one was a Hindu, and one was a politician. And the three of them were out on a hike. They were going for a little excursion, and they lost their way. And they were searching for lodgings for that night. The sun was setting. They needed a roof above their heads. And they find a farmhouse. They knock on the door. And the farmer welcomes them in and says, "I only have 2 beds in my home. The third of you will have to sleep out in the barn." And the Jewish fellow and the politician look at the Hindu man pleadingly, and the Hindu man says, "Okay, I agree, I will go sleep in the barn." He goes to sleep in the barn, and the politician and the Jewish man go to sleep in the cozy beds. Well, 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and it's the Hindu man. And he's back from the barn, and he says to his 2 comrades, he says, "Fellas, I was in the barn, and there's a cow in the barn, sleeping in the barn. In my religion, we revere a cow as something divine. I can't sleep in the same barn as a cow." And they say, "Okay." So the Jewish man says, "You know what, I'll take a turn in the barn." He goes to sleep in the barn, and the Hindu and the politician sleep in the cozy beds. Well, 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and it's the Jewish man coming back to the home, and he says to the politician and to the Hindu man, he says, "I was going to sleep in the barn, but there was a pig sleeping in the barn, and in my religion, we don't eat pork. I tried not to get too close to a pig. I didn't want to sleep out there in the barn with a pig." So they turn to the politician, and he's the only one left who didn't have his time out in the cold, and the politician goes to the barn to go to sleep. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's the pig and the cow. The title of today's class is Stories from the Talmud, and we hope to explore a variety of kinds of stories. Some stories will be episodes that occurred to some of the sages of the Talmud. Others will be stories that are almost fantastic, which really are parables. They're meant as metaphors for important lessons in life. And the other parts of these stories of the Talmud will be explaining texts of the Bible, of the Torah. So we'll go through some of those together. It's a nice potpourri. It's quite varied in their nature. The first story is source 1, and I would like to thank our wonderful Bela Berman. Bela comes here every single week, make sure things are set up perfectly, and this week she printed out our source sheets for us on the partner stationery. So if you ever have any questions about partners, the phone number is posted there on the bottom of the source sheets. And the first story is a story about a man named Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. In the Talmudic times, and this remained true for a while beyond Talmudic times, people didn't have last names. You were known as, I would be Chaim ben Rav Reuven. That's what they would call me. They would call me so-and-so, the son of your father. That's the way people were often referred to in Talmudic times. And this is a man named Rabbi Shimon, the son of Chalafta. And he was a man who was rather large in dimensions. He was obese. He was huge. It's interesting, if you look at the different stories in the Talmud, you'll find that people that were very large were considered to be attractive. To be very big in the olden days was considered to be attractive, and to have pale skin was also considered to be attractive. If you were too dark, you weren't going to make it on the front cover of People magazine if your skin was too dark. And it's the contrary, it's the opposite of what we have nowadays. Nowadays, thin and with a good tan. And just to explain perhaps the rationale, this is my own theory, and you could agree if you like, and you could disagree if you want as well. But in the olden days, food was sparse. People didn't have cupboards full of food. And if somebody was large, that meant that they were able to support themselves with abundance. It was kind of like somebody wearing a Rolex nowadays. They did studies how people will be attracted to somebody else based on what kind of watch they're wearing. And if somebody was very large, it meant that they had wealth. That's what it meant. And that's why that was seen perhaps in those days as attractive. Now, in terms of skin color, nowadays if you're tan, it means you've been down to Florida, Puerto Rico, perhaps Cancun. And again, that's a sign of affluence. In the olden days, though, if you were dark, it means you've been working out in the fields. If you were wealthy, you were able to have hired hands that would do that for you. And people that would get tan means that they were laborers, they weren't landowners. So there is this correlation between wealth and attraction, and that perhaps explains it. So this man, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, was very, very large, which in Talmudic times was considered a plus. They also didn't realize the negative health effects, that the deleterious effects that obesity would have on a person's health. I had a friend in Israel, and this he was huge. He was way over 300 pounds, and probably close to 400. And one day he went to go visit. It's considered a mitzvah to visit people that were in an old age home, and he went to go visit, and he looked around, and he was taken by the fact that there was nobody in this home that was severely overweight. And he's asking himself, why is it that nobody in the old age home is obese like me? And he realizes because nobody that big ever lived long enough to make it to the old age home. And he was inspired without any kind of surgery. He was inspired to go on a very healthy lifestyle where he ate tremendous amounts of lettuce and he did exercise, and he lost 100 pounds over the course of about 6 or 7 months. So that's this man, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. He was obese. And one day, it became too hot for him. Somebody who's very large will often feel the warmth sooner than they have a lot of insulation. And he was hot. And he went up and he sat upon the peak of a mountain. Very often a mountaintop will have cooler temperatures at higher elevations. It's a few degrees cooler. It will have a breeze, and he's sitting there. But the breeze wasn't so good that day. And he told his daughter, he says, "My daughter, wave your fan upon me, please, and I shall give you bunches of nard." Nard were these aromatic spices that people would use in lieu of perfume or deodorant back in the ancient times. He says to her, "Please, take your fan and fan me, help me cool off. I'm so big, I'm so hot." And she does. But a few moments later, at that point, a wind blew. A wind came. Better than any fan. And this rabbi says, wow, how many bunches of nard belong to the master of this wind? Who's the master of that wind? It's God. He causes the wind to blow. And he's saying, I promised my daughter reward. I was going to show my gratitude to her for taking a fan and sending some wind my way. Now God, in his magnificence, sent me this huge wind. How many bunches of nard must I dedicate to him? And what I like about this story is that when somebody else does a good turn for us, does a favor, they're at the store and they give us a phone call and they say, I'm at the supermarket, I realize it's snowing today, it's not that easy to get out. Is there anything I could pick up for you? They're your next door neighbor. And you'll be overcome with gratitude. Thank you so much. Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm short on milk and I want my hot chocolate. And they bring it to you. You have tremendous gratitude to them. And we have to sometimes take a step back and appreciate and realize there are so many good things that come our way from God. And we need to show our gratitude. And just a few thoughts on that. We just had the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, Tu is really the Hebrew letters Tes and Vav, which means the 15th day of the month of Shvat. And that is seen as the birthday, as the Rosh Hashanah, as the beginning of the year for trees. And the reason why it's relevant for trees to have a birthday, to have a new year, is because in Judaism, there are certain tithes that are given. We give a certain percentage to the Levites, to the Kohen, and different years have different tithes. Certain years we give a tithe to the poor, other years we give it to, we give it to the Levites, and certain years we bring it to Jerusalem and we enjoy it there ourselves. And in terms of realizing which year is this fruit, is this a 5th year apple or is it a 6th year apple? Where's the cutoff? That's Tu B'Shvat. If the fruit took form by Tu B'Shvat, then it belongs to the previous year. If it didn't yet take form, if it's still only a flower and it's going to bud after Tu B'Shvat, then that is a 6th year apple. That's the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. But just a thought about fruit. I love fruit. My kids call me the fruit man. It's my favorite food. interesting anecdote. When I went on my first date with my wife, so the way it went was I went to her house to pick her up, and her parents sat me down. They wanted to meet the young man that's about to take their daughter out on a date, make sure he's not a criminal, I guess. And I guess they would often serve potential gentleman's suitor some cake and coffee. But it was right before Passover. And cake and crumbs and bread and pretzels, my mother-in-law saw them as public enemy number one at that time of year. And she says, "I'm sorry, young man, I don't have any cake for you. All I have is fruit." And she didn't realize it at the time, but that is my absolute favorite thing to eat. And I said, "Okay, I think fruit will do just fine." That was, so I love fruit. And this is a novel idea that I had, and it's appreciating God through the fruits that we have. If I were to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, these citrus fruits, the oranges and the clementines and the grapefruits, when is their season? When can you go into a Trader Joe's and pick up a bag of clementines or navel oranges for very little money, and they will be absolutely delicious, full of juice, perfect in texture? When is their season? And the answer is, their season is right now.
No.
In the dead of winter right now. Yesterday I bought a bag of clementines and a bag of navel oranges. Cut them up for dinner, the navel oranges, and sent the clementines with my kids for snacks for school. Very cheap, very delicious. When is the season of watermelon? It's not now, right? It's the summer. It's the summer. You can buy watermelon now, and I had some watermelon last night. Partners in Torah has a Tuesday night learning program. We get about 300 people that come every Tuesday night to study one-on-one with partners. It's fascinating. You can check it out. You can call this number right here at the bottom of your source sheets if you want to learn more about that. Watermelon season is in the summer. Now, when is citrus most beneficial to us? Well, the winters when you have all these colds, all of these flus going around, and we need a little extra boost of vitamin C to push us to the healthy side of things. When does a person need watermelon? Well, if it's 100 degrees outside and you're perspiring and it's really hot and you need that beautiful, sweet and cold watermelon to refresh you, rejuvenate you. It's the summer. And here my thought of gratitude, just like you see in this Talmudic story where the wind blew and the rabbi said, let's give gratitude to God. Through fruit, I believe, we could appreciate. The seasons of the fruits are so custom tailored to what we need. Watermelon in the summer, citrus fruits in the winter. It's not a coincidence because God who created us wants to give us something special. Now one more thought. I may have mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. We have water right here, an incredible substance. When we look at the things that exist in this world, what's expensive in the world? Well, you'll say gold, you'll say diamonds. Those are items that are not essential for our survival. You can live without gold and you can live without diamonds. You don't need it. It's nice, very nice, but you don't need it. And that's very expensive. And as you move down the chain of things in terms of how expensive they are, how unaffordable they are, you move from diamonds and gold, which you don't really need. Let's move on then to clothing. Clothing is pretty important, but you don't need that much of it, right? It's pretty expensive too. Moving down to food. Food is, we can't live without food. You could buy food, cheap food, for not too much money. A bag of rice could sustain you for a pretty long time. A bag of potatoes, pretty inexpensive. But what's even more vital to our existence than food? Water. Right here, H2O. You could go for probably about a week without food, just a few days without water. And water is one of the most common substances around. It is incredibly inexpensive and affordable. There's one item even more crucial to our survival than water, and it's even more plentiful. Air. Take a deep breath, friends. That's air, right? And again, appreciating the world that we live in. God placed us in a world that is so well suited for our survival. We need to show some gratitude to the one who makes the wind blow. That's story number one, source number one in the stories from the Talmud. Let's move on to another story. This story is a bit longer. Fascinating story. One of the great sages of the Mishnah, a man named Hillel. Hillel was known for his patience. The story goes that a man, a non-Jewish man, comes over to, there were two sages at the time, one named Shammai, who was known not to have the most patience, and Hillel, who You couldn't perturb him, no matter what you did. And a man came to Shammai, stood on one foot, and said, "Teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot." And Shammai says, "That's impossible. Leave." And the same man came to Hillel and said to Hillel, "Teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot." And Hillel summed it up for him in one pithy statement. He said, "What you don't want someone else to do to you, don't do to others. Love your neighbor like yourself." So Hillel was known for his incredible forbearance, his incredible patience, and this story so well illustrates that notion. And the rabbis taught in a brisa. A brisa is a teaching of the Tanaim, the early rabbis of the Mishnah. One should always strive to be humble, like Hillel. Hillel was an incredibly humble person, and humility is known as one of the most positive character traits. You can't be too humble. And let one not be as stern, as rigid, like Shammai. Because it once happened that two people made a bet with one another. And they said, whoever goes and provokes Hillel to lose his temper, if one of us could incite the wrath of Hillel, he's going to take 400 zuz as his prize. The zuz was the currency in the times of the Talmud and the Mishnah. My son, who's now 10 years old, when he was younger, he once had a teacher, and it was the teacher of Judaic studies. And the teacher many teachers do this, use incentive systems to get the children to perform well in school, to behave. And he created a kind of currency which replicated the Talmudic currency. So for example, he had these coins called zuz. He had another coin called a mona, another coin called a sela, and the increments where you had 25 zuz, let's say, in a sela, was exactly matched up and paralleled that of the Talmud. So the children learned from an early age the currency of the Talmud. It was a fascinating, very creative way that this teacher used to incentivize the students. So the bet was on for 400 zuz. Thereupon one of them said, I will provoke him. I'm going to do it. I take the bet. I'm going to do it. And that day was the eve of Shabbos. And we know that sometimes when people prepare for Shabbos, things can get a little hectic. Sometimes you go down to the wire, especially now. They're getting a little bit longer, but the short afternoons, there's a lot to do. And things could sometimes be a little bit stressful. I, for a year, taught in a Jewish high school in New York, a place called Westchester Hebrew High School. It was a fantastic experience for me. And I had a girl, and she said, in my home, things are very stressful right before Shabbos. Parents are very tense, and they're sometimes yelling at us. And I don't want my house to be that way. I don't think I'm going to have Shabbos in my home. And to me, it was very disturbing that instead of the parents giving a positive experience to their children, the strife and the tenseness in the home created the opposite of what they wanted. And I said, it doesn't have to be that way. Things can be calm. That's an important lesson that I took from this girl. I have to always make sure that even when sometimes things come down to the wire, you want to make sure you give your children a very positive feeling towards the Shabbos. And it was the eve of Shabbos, and that's when he chose to test the patience of Hillel. And Hillel was busy shampooing his hair in preparation for Shabbos. He was taking a bath, showering, which is what is a nice thing to do to prepare for Shabbos, go in freshly bathed. And this person went and passed by the doorway of his house, calling, "Is there a Hillel here?" In a bit of a loud voice. "Is there a Hillel here?" And Hillel put on his cloak and he went out to greet the person and said to him, "My son, what can I do for you? What do you seek?" And the person replied to him, "I have a question to ask you, an important, pressing question." Hillel said, "Ask, my son, ask. What do you have to ask?" And he says, "Why is it that the heads of the Babylonians are so round?" They lived near Babylon. Why are the heads of the Babylonians so round? And that is a question that is not relevant, it's not urgent, it's not pressing. It perhaps is putting down a group of people. Well, how does Hillel respond? Hillel replied, "My son, you have asked a truly profound question." He wasn't put off by the question. And he answered, they don't have the most skillful midwives. And therefore the heads upon delivery are rounder a bit than they should. Okay. Hillel goes back to his preparations of Shabbos. The person went away and waited a little bit. And then he returned to the front of Hillel's house and called out again, "Is there a Hillel here? Is there a Hillel here?" Hillel again put on his cloak and went out to greet the person. He said to him, "My son, what do you seek?" The person replied, "I have a question to ask of you." Hillel said, "Ask, my son, ask." And now his profound question was, why is it that the eyes of the Talmudians, another group of people lived in the area, why are they especially round? Hillel replied, "My son, you have asked a truly profound question. The reason is because they live in sandy terrain." Now, I'm going to pause for a moment. Sometimes people will ask me, I'm a rabbi, and they'll say, "Rabbi, do you believe in evolution? Do you believe in Darwin's theory of evolution?" I studied it in biology in the 9th grade. And my answer is not exactly, but yes. And I'll show you what I mean. I don't believe that people originated from apes. I believe that we were created as intelligent human beings, as it states in the Torah in the beginning of Genesis. But I've noticed the following. You have people living in Israel who are probably 3rd or 4th generation Israelis. Their parents came from the same shtetl that our grandparents came from. Their grandparents had very light skin, but yet now they're giving birth to babies that are of a darker skin. And I believe that Hashem created people, God created people, in this incredible way that we have the ability to adapt. And if you live in the Middle East where the sun is sometimes merciless, beats down on you, your skin will become darker, and eventually you will give birth to a child whose skin is darker. Give it a few generations. So Hashem created us with the ability to evolve and adapt in order to suit the environments in which we live. And that is what is being said, I believe, here, that they live in a sandy terrain, and therefore their eyes need to be the right shape that's able to accommodate that kind of terrain in which they live. We're going to turn over to page 2. And the person then went away and waited a while. He comes back to Hillel's door and he calls out again a 3rd time, "Is there a Hillel here? Is there a Hillel?" Hillel once again put on his cloak and went out to greet him and said, "What can I do for you, my son? What do you seek?" The person replied, "I have a question to ask of you." Hillel said, "Ask, my son, ask. Why is it that the feet of the Africans are so wide?" And Hillel replied to him, "My son, you've asked a profound question. The reason is because they live in swamplands, and therefore, in order to be able to get around there, their feet are wider. They're able to move in the area in which they live." And the guy saw he was not doing it. This bet was not going his way. He's not doing well. He said to him, "I have a great many questions to ask of you, but I'm fearful that you might become angry with me." Hillel wrapped himself in his cloak, and he sits down in front of him, and he said, "Every question that you have to ask, feel free to ask." The person then said, "Are you the great Hillel whom they call the Prince of the Jewish people?" Hillel replied, "Yeah, that's me," which, by the way, tells you something else about humility. Humility does not mean that you don't realize who you are. He knew that he was the leader of the people. He knew what talents and skills that he had. Humility does not mean that you are not aware. It's not a foolishness where you're naive and you don't realize. He realized that he was the great prince of the Jewish people, but he attributed that to the God-given gifts that he was endowed with. He didn't say, "I'm so great." He said, "God gave me abilities," and he thanked God for them. That's perhaps what humility means. He said, "Yes, that's me." The person said to him, "If it is indeed you, let there not be many like you among the Jewish people." And Hillel says, "Well, why do you say such a thing? Why are you upset at me?" And the person responded, "Because on your account I lost 400 zuz. I just lost a bet. The bet was I was going to provoke you and get you angry, and it didn't work." Hillel responded to him, "One should vigilantly guard his disposition. Make sure you don't get angry. Don't lose your temper." On the way here, I was listening to a lecture, and the rabbi teaching the lecture said from the Talmud that when somebody loses their temper, when they fly off the deep end, and they just go ballistic, they go crazy, the Talmud says it is as if they have worshipped idols. Why? Because when you get so angry at somebody else, you're failing to acknowledge that God is playing a role in this episode. What's going on here is that God is allowing this to happen. And if you're getting so angry at another person, you're kind of ignoring God's role in what's unfolding. If you realize that for whatever reason, God just sent this my way, then okay. It wouldn't get you so upset. So therefore, Hillel says, guard your disposition very carefully. The rabbi went on to tell an incredible story. He said that he was booked for a weekend as a guest lecturer, And they made up an agreement how much they would pay him to come for the weekend. Friday afternoon, just a few hours before he was about to get in his car and drive to where he was supposed to be the guest lecturer for the weekend, they called him up to cancel. No explanation, no apology. We're canceling the weekend. He was fuming. He was really angry. He didn't even have any food prepared for Shabbos. He and his wife went out to a friend that night because they didn't prepare a meal of their own. Come back, he's still very angry. He sits down with a big stack of books that he's going to learn, and he falls asleep. Wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's restless. He can't sleep. He starts to go up. He lived in an apartment building. He starts to go up. He had an office on the 4th floor. He starts walking up the steps. As he's walking up the steps, he sees, sitting on one of the landings, is a young man, looking very disturbed, with the door to his apartment slightly ajar. Puts his hand on the young man's shoulder and says, "What's wrong? What's the matter?" The young man runs into his apartment and tries to slam the door. The rabbi realized something was up, something was wrong, and he stops the door from closing, comes in and sees on the counter a container of tablets, of pills, that this young man was about to take. He was in the process, he already took a few. He was going to take in order to end his life. And the rabbi used his influence to convince him not to do it, not to go ahead with it. And he said, a little while earlier, I was fuming at these people that canceled on me for that weekend. Now I see, God played a role in that. I was able to save somebody's life today. How often is it that you have the opportunity to save somebody's life? And he said, if you realize that God plays a role in things that happen to you, you won't go off the deep end. You won't get so upset. As Hillel says, it's important to guard your disposition. Never get so angry. And as the story concludes, Hillel is worth you are losing on his account 400 zuz, and yet another 400 zuz, but Hillel will not take offense. The importance of never losing your temper, of never getting angry. This is an extreme example. I would not have patience for this guy, But there are levels. There's levels of losing patience, and the idea is never to really lose it completely. Share with you another story from the Talmud. This story in source 3 on page 2 is based on the episode in the Torah right before the Jewish people were going to enter into the land of Israel. They were right by the Trans-Jordan and the plains of Moab, and they were going to cross over into the Jordan River. Moses was going to pass the reins of leadership over to his prime disciple Joshua, but before they did that, they fought 2 wars on the eastern side of the Jordan River. There were 2 very powerful kings. One of them was named Og Melech HaBashan, Og the king of Bashan. And the other king was an Amorite king known as Sichon the king of the Amorites. And they came to attack the Jewish people. And we fought back, and the Torah tells us, in the end of the book of Numbers, that we were victorious against these 2 kings. But the Talmud elaborates a bit further about the war with Og. And it tells us a story that seems so fantastic that it's hard to believe that it could be taken literally. And indeed, there's a deeper meaning behind this story, and that's what I hope to explore with you today. The story goes in source 3 that Og, this huge giant of a man, he was imposing, he was huge. And he picks up this very large rock, almost like a mountain. And he's going to lift it up, and he's going to threaten to throw it upon the encampment of the Jewish people. The story goes, the stone that Og, the king of Bashan, wanted to throw upon Israel. Regarding that stone, a tradition has been transmitted which states that Og said to himself, how big is the camp of the Jewish people? He said it is 3 parsos square. A parsa is a measurement of area used in the Talmud, which is roughly anywhere between 2.5 and 3 miles. So this mountain, this stone that he lifts up, is 3 parsa by 3 parsa. If you do the math, let's say it's parsa is 3 miles, so 3 times 3, it's 9 miles by 9 miles. Huge. The idea that any person should be able to lift up something that large. Think about 9 miles. That's almost the distance between here and my home. 9 miles by 9 miles square. Impossible. What does this story mean? He lifted up this mountain so large. He says, I will go and uproot a mountain that is 3 parsos square and throw it upon them, and I'm going to kill them using this mountain. He went and he uprooted a mountain that was 3 parsos square and carried it moving down to page number 3. Carried it on his head. But the Holy One, blessed is he, brought ants onto the mountain. Ants come, a swarm of ants, which bored a hole through it, and it fell around his neck. He wanted to remove it from around his neck, but his teeth began to extend downward to this side and to the other side, and he could not remove it. So again, the image here, huge, giant, large mountain above his head. Ants come, eat away at the center of the mountain, slips down across his shoulders. He wants to throw it off, but his teeth now grow out of his mouth and extend into the mountain. He can't get rid of it. Then Moshe came. Moshe being 10 amos tall, and amma is the measurement from the tip of one's middle finger to the tip of the elbow, roughly 2 feet. Moses being what's said to be almost 20 feet tall, wielding an axe that was as large as himself, he jumped 10 amos, struck Og in the ankle, and this caused the demise of the giant Og. Again, mountain around his neck, teeth stuck in the mountain. Moses, 20 feet tall, holding an axe 20 feet high, jumps 20 feet in the air, swings the axe, hits the giant in the ankle, and the giant dies. The story is perplexing, strange, bizarre. Lifting up a rock that large, what does that mean? How by hitting this giant in the ankle is, you would think somebody who's 9 miles by 9 miles, right? How is hitting him in the ankle going to even make a dent? What does it mean that ants came and made a hole in it? You would think that the thing should crumble when ants make a hole in it. What does it mean that his teeth started growing and got embedded? What does this all mean? So, let's delve a bit deeper into the history of this giant man, Og. Og lived first during the time of the giants before the great flood, in the times of Noah. And he saved himself by holding on to the ark. He held on to the outside of the ark, and that's how he was saved. We'll see that source in the Talmud in a moment. But there was another very important, a pivotal moment in the life of Og. And that goes back to the times of Abraham. We know that Abraham was married to Sarah, and Abraham had a nephew by the name of Lot. That was Abraham's nephew, Lot. Lot parted ways from Abraham. There had been a dispute between the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot. Lot would allow his animals to go out unmuzzled and graze in the fields of others, and Abraham said, that's not my way. I don't want people to think this is the way I do things. If that's how you're going to conduct yourself, not being scrupulous and careful about other people's property, then we're going to have to part ways. And Lot says, very well then. And he moves to the city of Sodom. The city of Sodom was attacked. There was a world war between the 4 kings and the 5 kings. And Sodom and everybody inside of that city was captured by the 4 kings. The 4 kings won. And at that point, the Torah tells us that a refugee, an escapee who escaped that war, comes to Abraham and says to Abraham, your nephew has been captured. Your nephew was captured. Upon which Abraham arms his servants and goes to war against the 4 kings and wins. That's the story. That's source 4. Let's read that in the verses of Genesis. Page 3, source 4. Then there came the escapee, but it doesn't say who he was. Who was this man who escaped the war? And he told Abraham, this was before Abraham's name was changed to Abraham. The Ivri, Abraham was known as the Ivri. He lived on the other side. His also belief system was on the other side of what everyone else believed. Everyone believed in many gods. And he was of the belief that there's just one all-powerful God. And Abraham dwelt in the plains of Mamre, the Amorite. And this man, Mamre, was the brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner, these being Abraham's allies. So Abraham lived among his friends. And when Abraham heard that his kinsman, meaning Lot, was taken captive, he armed his disciples, who had been born in his house, 318 of them to be exact, and he pursued these 4 kings until Dan, and he was victorious. He won the battle. Fascinating story based on the Midrash that I remember reading when I was younger, I was a child. The Midrash says, well, how did Abraham win this war with 318 soldiers against the 4 powers of the world? How does that work? And the Midrash says that it was a miraculous war where Abraham took dirt and he had his servants and just throw it at the at the soldiers of the other armies, and it would turn into daggers and spears, and that's how he was able to win. And the story goes, it says that one time, years later, generations later, when Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were once journeying to Rome, and when the Roman emperor was in control of Jerusalem, it was important that the Jews find favor in the eyes of the emperor, because he would sometimes pass harsh laws against the Jews. And they were going to bring him a gift. They collected gold coins and beautiful gems, and they were going to bring that to the emperor of Rome as a gift. They spent the night in an inn. They landed in the port in Rome late at night, and they went to an inn. They had this very valuable chest of gold coins and gems. Where do you protect a chest like that? Well, the safest place was to bury it in the ground. Nobody would know that it's there. They buried it in the ground. They were not aware that the innkeeper was an unscrupulous, dishonest man. He sees these rabbis burying a chest. He waits an hour. They go to sleep, and the innkeeper goes out in the middle of the night, digs up this chest, steals all of the gold and the gems, and fills it up with dirt so they wouldn't realize that the chest is empty. This way it was the same weight as it was before. The rabbis, not aware of the fact that their chest no longer contains gold and gems, but rather dirt, they bring the chest to the emperor as a gift. The emperor opens the chest, sees dirt. He says to the rabbis, "Is this an insult? Are you trying to insult me? What's the meaning of this?" And Rabbi Akiva, who himself was able to work miracles, said to the emperor, "Let me tell you a story about the miraculous dirt of Abraham." Tells him the story, says, "This is that dirt that's going to win you wars." And the emperor tries it out, and it works. The innkeeper hears about what miraculous dirt he has in his backyard. He's going to sell some to the emperor himself. It didn't go very well. So this is a story from the Midrash about the dirt of Abraham, how he won the war. Going back to Og, though. Og was responsible for helping Abraham save his nephew Lot. And that's a merit. That's a merit. The Talmud in Tractate Nida tells us that this escapee was none other than the giant Og. And let's see that in source 5. Hashem said to Moses, "Do not fear him." That's a verse where Moses was scared of this giant Og, and God says to Moses, "Don't be afraid, don't worry, you're going to be able to beat him." And the Talmud asks, let us see. There were these two giants, Sichon and Og. Sichon was the Amorite king, Og was the king of the Bashan, and they were brothers. For the master said, Sichon and Og were the sons of Achia bar Shamchazai. That was the father of the two giants. And what was different about Og that Moses feared him? And what was different about Sichon that Moses did not fear him? These were two giants equal in proportion to each other. Moses was afraid of one and not afraid of the other. Asks the Talmud why. Why was he scared of one and not the other? And the great Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, from the answer to that righteous one, meaning from when God tells him, don't be afraid, you see that there was what to be fearful of. You can know what was in Moses' heart. He said, perhaps the merit of Abraham, our forefather, will stand up for them. Og helped a very great man. He helped Abraham rescue his nephew. And that's an incredible merit. Maybe the merit of Og will help him defeat us. Moses realized that battles are not only won based on strength and strategy, but God's will often determine who is victorious in battle. And now Og has this merit of helping Abraham retrieve his captive nephew. For it is stated, the verse that we saw just before, the escapee came and told Abraham the Ivri that Abraham's nephew Lot was captured. And Rabbi Yochanan taught the escapee is none other than Og. Why is he called the escapee? Because he escaped from the generation of the flood. Let's take a step back for a moment. Og had this merit of helping Abraham. Now our forefathers and our matriarchs are often referred to in Scripture as mountains and as hills. And I'll show you a scriptural verse. If you take a look on page number 4, source 6. This is a verse from the book of Numbers, and this is from one of the sayings of the prophet, the wicked prophet Bilam. And he's speaking about the Jewish people. And he says, for from its origins, from its very beginnings, I see it rock-like. It's like a rock, like a large mountain. That's a reference to our patriarchs. And from hills, that refers to our matriarchs. do I see it. Mountains and hills is often used as a metaphor by Scripture to refer to our great patriarchs and matriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Mountains, hills. And that is the meaning of this very large mountain that Og lifts above his head. The mountain refers to the patriarch Abraham, who he helped. And that was the merit that he sought to use to destroy the Jewish people. It was the merit of the mountain, the merit of Abraham. Now he's threatening the Jewish people with that merit. Ants come and start eroding the mountain. Now an ant is very unique. The Talmud says if you want to learn about diligence, hard work, learn it from an ant. Ants are able to carry many times their own body weight. An ant is a small creature in stature, but it's able to accomplish tremendous things. And that is the symbol of the prayers of the Jewish people. Little ants. The Jewish people were never the most numerous people in the world, but we've accomplished tremendous things. When you think about just how many Nobel Prizes were won by Jewish people. It's 30, 40% in certain areas. Yet we're a very small fraction of the world population. What we've managed to accomplish, though, is huge. Our prayers, the prayers of small people that may seem insignificant, were able to accomplish tremendous things. And that's the idea of the ants corroding the mountain. Our prayers were able to take out his weapon, his teeth. He realizes that this is not going to go well for him. But his teeth start to grow down into the mountain. I'm going to show you another verse in Scripture from Psalms which shows you that the teeth of the wicked people is this. That's the symbol, that's the idea of them trying to devour the righteous, trying to harm the Jewish people, sometimes even at their own expense. They realize they're going to be doomed, but they hate us so much they're going to do it anyway. In Surah 7, a quote from King David from the book of Psalms. It says, Hallelujah, praised is God, and praiseworthy is the man who fears Hashem, who greatly desires his commandments. Praiseworthy are the righteous, says King David. The wicked man will see this. He will see the devotion of the righteous, and he'll be angered. It will anger him to see the righteous, the devotion, and he will gnash his teeth. That's the idea of the teeth. You know, they say that the Germans, the Nazis, they realized in 1944 that their end was near. And they had a limited amount of trains that they were able to use to transport things. The generals told Hitler, use the trains on the Eastern Front. We need to get supplies to our troops that are fighting the Soviets on the East. And Hitler said, no, we're going to use those trains to deport Jews to Auschwitz. He realized that he was harming himself. He needed those trains for the military. But his hatred was even willing to harm himself. And that's the idea of this teeth, the teeth of Og. He knew he was not going to win this battle. But his teeth were just stuck in the mountain. He couldn't get himself out of it. He was consumed by hatred. And then Moses, being 10 amos tall, what does that mean? The idea of 10 in Judaism symbolizes perfection. There are 10 sfirot in the Kabbalistic beliefs. There are 10 levels of the world. When you hit 10, it means you have reached perfection. Moses came to Og with himself being an almost perfect person. He came with an axe, which was 10 amos tall, and that refers to the Jewish people. If you see Moses as our leader, he was able to handle us the way that somebody who's holding an axe is able to use it. And he jumps. He jumps 10 amos high. The idea of jumping means he goes back in the past. Not only does he use his own merit, not only does he use the merit of the Jewish people, he uses our merits from the past. The patriarchs, the matriarchs. Whenever we begin our prayers, we always refer to that our relationship with God is not a new-found relationship. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We always refer back to the merits of the past. And that is the symbol of him jumping up, jumping back to the past. And he strikes Og in the ankle. What does that mean? Well, if you remember the verse that we saw before, what was the merit of Og? It was that he came, it was that he walked all the way to Abraham to tell him about his captured nephew Lot. He's able to neutralize that merit of the ankle, merit of walking, of making that trip to Abraham to come tell him about his nephew. That's the symbolism of the ankle, neutralizing the merit that he got through walking, making that trip. It's an incredible thing. Sometimes we get merit for walking to do a good deed, not just for the good deed itself, but we get merit for walking there to go do it, everything that's involved in that process. Nowadays you'll say, we drove to come hear a Torah class. You get merit for the trip, for driving there. It's actually brought down, it's a fascinating idea, in the Code of Jewish Law. It tells a person, well, how do you select which synagogue you go to? Right? How do you make that decision? Sometimes there's several synagogues. The former chief rabbi of Great Britain, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, says that when he became chief rabbi, someone gave him as a gift a book called the Jewish Almanac, and it was different facts, Jewish facts from around the world. And it said about China, population 1 billion. Amount of Jews, I think it was 5. And he said there's one thing that he's certain of, that those 5 Jews in China have at least 3 synagogues. So how do you choose which synagogue to go to? And there are many ways, there are many components, and that's a difficult, complex decision. But one of the factors that weigh in, it says you should choose a synagogue that's a little bit further from your house than the others. Counterintuitive. Further? Yes. Because when you get merit for going to synagogue, you don't just get merit for sitting there in the synagogue. You get merit for going there. And if it's a little further, you get a little bit more merit. Once we're on the topic of synagogues, there was once a man, Saturday morning, he did not want to go to synagogue. And his mother is trying to wake him up, get him out of bed to go to synagogue, and she says, honey, you got to go to synagogue. He says, I don't want to go. He says, I'll give you 2 reasons why I don't want to go. A, I just don't really like it, and B, nobody's nice to me. And she says, sweetheart, as your mother, I'm going to tell you a really strong reason why you have to go. You have to go because you are the rabbi. It was just a joke. Just a joke. So, we get merit. We get merit when we do something good and wonderful, not just for the deed itself, but for the process that takes us there. And that was the symbolism of Og's ankle. You use the ankle a lot in walking. He walked to Abraham to tell him, your nephew is captured, he needs your help. That was his merit, and that's where Moses was able to neutralize that merit at the ankle. So you see a story that seems fantastic, it seems impossible, a giant lifting up a mountain. That mountain refers to the merit of our patriarch Abraham, whom he helped. The idea of ants represents our prayers. The idea that Moses was so tall, 10, with an axe of 10, jumping 10, that's the idea of the perfection of Moses, of the Jewish people. Jumping up refers to the past, our past merit, and the ankle again is a reference to the merit that Og had. There's a deeper meaning to that story. We have a few minutes left, and I would like to use that time to explore with you an agadic. Agadic means the stories of the Talmud, and there are a few forms that it takes, but here it's going to explain a little bit about the manna. We just read in last week's Torah portion that the Jewish people were in the desert. What did they eat for 40 years? They ate this miraculous food that fell down from heaven every single day. They would go out to collect called manna. And the Talmud and Tractate Yoma explains some of the, what was it like? What did it taste like? What color was it? And we're going to explore some of that together. Source 8, page 4. The Torah states, who feeds you manna in the wilderness in order to afflict you. This is a verse from Deuteronomy. The topic of the manna is discussed in last week's parsha in Beshalach, and it's again discussed later on in the Torah. It's in the book of Numbers. And it says that Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi debated, what does it mean? What does this mean? It said that God fed us the manna in order to afflict us. It was a great food. What level of affliction do we experience with the manna? What does that mean, to afflict us? And there was a dispute between these 2 Talmudic sages, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. And one said the following, very wise statement. One who has bread in his basket is not similar to one who does not have bread in his basket. Now what does that mean regarding the land? One who has bread in his basket is not like one who does not. And the idea is that manna fell every single morning. Miraculous food. But there was a rule associated with the manna. You were not allowed to leave anything over for tomorrow. The Torah tells us a few people did, and it rotted, it wasted away. You were allowed to gather up the amount that you needed for that day, and no more than that. So imagine going to sleep at night with nothing in your cupboard for tomorrow. Imagine going to sleep at night with nothing in your bank account, no savings, nothing in your checking account, and you say, don't worry, God will give me more tomorrow. It built this incredible faith in the Jewish people. You know, if this was our formative stage as a people, it was able to instill within us a very strong sense of reliance and belief in God. But it was a little bit uncomfortable. It was a certain sense of affliction of not having any bread in your basket for tomorrow. That's one opinion. There's another opinion. It says, what was the affliction of the man? And one said, still in source 8, one who sees and eats is not similar to one who cannot see and eats. Now what does this mean? They were able to see the manna, but what it means is, even though we're going to see momentarily that the manna was a miraculous food, it could taste like anything you wanted. What did it taste like? Well, what do you want it to taste like? Certain people will say chocolate. You know, I know many people that would say chocolate. Ice cream. Ice cream. There we go. That's the number 2. Certain men will say they want beef. They want a good steak. You know, it could taste like anything you wanted. But what did it look like? It was round. It was white. It looked the same every single day. So even though it could taste like whatever you imagined, it always looked the same. And here the Talmud is teaching us something very, bless you, so incredible about the culinary pleasures of life. And the restaurants get this. The way the food is presented, the way the food looks, plays an incredible role in how much you enjoy it. They know that well in the food industry, and that's why plating the food is such an important part of a restaurant's success. How well will they plate your food? How does it look? The manna, despite the fact that it could taste like anything you wanted, it always looked the same, identical. And that's the level of affliction that they had. And the Talmud goes on to say, you see from here that if a person has some food, you should always eat it in a place that you can see it well. We just experienced the blackout in Southfield. It was Sunday night. We lost our power for a few hours. We ate dinner in the dark with a few candles lit. It was a very nice experience. But the Talmud says that if you have a meal, you should eat it when you can see it. And that's at the end of source 8. It says, Rabbi Yosef said, from here is a scriptural allusion to the blind. Rabbi Yosef himself was blind. He was unable to see. That they eat but are not satisfied. The component of enjoying your food will never be had by a blind person because you can never see the food that you're enjoying. I remember my grandfather was blind. He was hit by a drunk driver midlife. He lost his eyes. And I remember him sitting, I was young. He passed when I was about 8 years old, but I remember he always ate a half of a grapefruit. My grandmother would slice it in half across, right through the middle for him, and he would kind of feel his way around the grapefruit. He used his hands to experience his food. He couldn't use his eyes. And Rabbi Yosef, who himself was blind, says, you will never enjoy your food as much if you can't see it. You know, there's a blessing that's recited every single morning in the morning prayers, where we thank God for pokeach ivrim, that you open up the eyes of the blind. It means that at night when we're sleeping, we can't see. And we wake up in the morning and we're able to see in a beautiful, magnificent world around us. The Talmud says, therefore, one who has a meal should eat it only during the day. You should eat it only during the day, because you'll enjoy it more, or with a good candle, you'll enjoy it more when you can see it. And this, by the way, I've done some research, reading different books with different dieting tips, and not that I need it, but I just, sometimes I try to eat a healthy lifestyle, and it'll say that if you're looking to lose weight, you should experience your food fully. Don't read when you're eating. Don't be distracted. Focus on the food. And it's like that, by the way, with pleasures in life. And it's like that with pain, too. The more you focus on it, the more you experience it, the more you enjoy it. So sometimes when I'm running, I like to run. You guys are all my secrets are put forth in front of you. I like to run. I went running today. And sometimes when you're running and you're pushing yourself, it could hurt. It could hurt. You get a little stitch in the side. And if you distract your mind, if you're listening to something which engages your mind when you're running, you will not feel the pain as much. It's like that with pleasure. That's what it's saying over here as well. When you could experience fully with sight, you're able to see the food. And there's a variety of colors. The manna always look the same. But we, thank God, live in a world where there's so many colors and textures and flavors to our food, we're able to experience that fully. So I'm going to end with that thought coming full circle, where we appreciate all of the foods that we have, going back to the first story, where appreciating that wind that God sent our way. I hope that you all have a wonderful day. And again, the month of March, the class will take place in the Handelman Hall. Great day, everyone. Take care.